All right, so we're doing a pretty interesting deep dive today. It's a bit of a strange one, actually.
Mhm.
Someone out there wants us to take a look at this book called The Playbook, Dominating Every Type of Woman. And from what I've seen so far, this book, well, it's written by this guy who calls himself Ya Boy Rick, or sometimes Mac Rich. I'm not really sure which one he prefers. But anyway, it's supposed to be this, like, guide for men who want to, like, basically run the show in their relationships with women. He uses some pretty strong language, and a lot of the strategies are, I guess you could say they're pretty intense. A lot of focus on, like, control and manipulation and stuff like that. So to the listener who requested this one, we're really curious. What are you hoping to get out of this? What is it about this book that you want to understand better?
Yeah, it's fascinating. This book is actually really popular, even though it's definitely, you know, it rubs some people the wrong way. But it does reflect a certain set of beliefs that, some people have about dating and relationships, especially when it comes to like the power dynamics between men and women. And even if, these views might make us uncomfortable or we disagree with them, I think it's really helpful to try to understand where they're coming from, especially if you're trying to navigate the dating world today.
Totally. Okay, so let's dive into this playbook, shall we?
Yeah.
One of the first things that kind of jumps out is how it breaks down women into these five different categories, like archetypes, I guess you could call them.
Right, exactly. It's
Yeah.
it's the party girl, the model, the freak, or sometimes he calls her the free spirit, the boss chick, and then the gold digger or the broke girl.
Mhm.
And obviously people are way more complicated than just fitting into these boxes. But I think it might be interesting to see if any of these descriptions kind of ring true for you at all, listener.
Hmm.
Based on your own experiences, maybe you've come across people who kind of fit these descriptions.
Yeah, for sure. And for each archetype, the book picks out like a specific weakness or insecurity that men can supposedly exploit. It's basically like figure out what type of woman you're dealing with and then use that knowledge to kind of get the upper hand. So let's start with the party girl. What's her deal, according to the playbook?
Okay, so the party girl, she's described as someone who loves attention, loves excitement, always wants to be the center of attention. Her weakness. The book says it's the fear of being ignored or replaced.
Okay, so how does the playbook suggest a man should handle a woman like that?
Well, the advice is to basically play it cool. Don't compete for her attention, be a little unpredictable. The idea is to kind of flip the script and make her think that she's the one who's chasing you.
I can see the logic there. Maybe that would work on someone who's used to all the attention being on them. It's kind of like giving them a taste of their own medicine in a way. But is that not a bit manipulative? What do you think, listener?
I think that's the key point here. The tactic itself, it might actually make sense in some situations. Like we've probably all seen this kind of dynamic play out in real life, right? But the motivation behind it, like wanting to exploit someone's insecurity just to gain control, that's where it becomes kind of ethically questionable.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So what about the model then? How does the playbook describe her?
The model is all about appearances. She's beautiful, she's used to getting compliments, maybe a little bit entitled, and the book says her weakness is that she needs constant validation. And she's afraid of being seen as shallow, like she's just a pretty face.
So how's a man supposed to dominate this type of woman, according to Cowboy Rick?
Well, he says you shouldn't put her on a pedestal. Compliment her on things other than her looks. Keep her guessing about how interested you really are. Basically, the idea is to kind of disrupt her usual experience with men.
So treat her like a normal person, basically. I mean, that doesn't sound so bad on the surface.
You're right, and in a way, it kind of highlights how important it is to actually connect with someone on a deeper level. And, see past just the superficial stuff. But again, it's the whole framing of it that's problematic.
Yeah.
Instead of coming at it from a place of respect and genuine interest, it's all about dominating the interaction.
Okay, I see what you mean. So next up we have the freak slash free spirit. She's the adventurous one, unpredictable, always looking for new experiences. What's her weakness, according to the playbook?
Well, the book claims that even though she loves her freedom, she secretly yearns for stability. So the advice is to kind of match her energy, go on adventures with her. But ultimately, you want to be the rock in her life, the stable presence amidst all the chaos.
So be the exciting but reliable guy, someone who can keep up with her free spirit, but also provide a sense of grounding. I could see how that dynamic would be appealing to someone who wants adventure but also craves a bit of security. Listener, have you ever encountered that kind of dynamic before?
It is interesting how the book touches on this very human desire for balance in our relationships.
Yeah.
We want someone who complements us, who brings something different to the table. But again, it comes back to the intention. Are you genuinely interested in connecting with this person? Or are you just trying to tame their free spirit?
All right, let's move on to the boss chick. Ambitious, independent, driven. Sounds like a lot of women we know, right?
Yeah.
But the playbook seems to think this type of woman is secretly terrified of being vulnerable and losing control.
Yeah, that's exactly what it says. And the strategy they recommend is to support her ambitions, but don't be intimidated by them. Challenge her, intellectually engage with her as an equal, and kind of subtly steer her focus towards you.
So don't be a fanboy, be her equal.
Hmm.
Again, not terrible advice on its own,
Hmm.
but it all depends on the context and the motivation behind it, right?
What I find interesting here is that the book is kind of unintentionally acknowledging that relationships are changing. More and more women are focused on their careers, and they want partners who respect their ambition, not partners who feel threatened by it.
Okay, last but not least, we have the gold digger slash broke girl. This is where the playbook gets really cynical. Basically, it says that this type of woman is only interested in money and status, or she's always needing financial help. And Rick seems to think her main goal is to, like, extract value from men. And her weakness is the fear of being called out on her motives.
Right. And the tactic to dominate her. Dangle the bait without giving in. Make her earn your resources, play the scarcity card. And if you have to directly confront her about her game.
So a mix of reverse psychology and tough love, I guess. Honestly, though, who wants to be in a relationship where you're constantly suspicious and playing these mind games? Wouldn't it be easier to just be upfront about finances and expectations from the start?
Absolutely. Open communication, shared values, those are like the foundation of any healthy relationship. And while the playbook thing might be entertaining to read about, it's definitely not a recipe for a lasting and fulfilling partnership.
Okay, so we've gone through these 5 archetypes, according to the playbook. Some of it's definitely out there, but I'm curious, listener, do any of these descriptions resonate with you? Even if you disagree with the tactics, have you encountered women who kind of fit these profiles? Think about that as we continue this deep dive, because now we're going to get into the specific strategies that the playbook recommends for, like, actually dominating these different types of women. And we'll talk about what a healthier, more respectful approach to these dynamics might look like.
Okay, so let's move beyond these archetypes now and get into some of the actual strategies that the playbook recommends. And again, we're not saying we agree with any of this stuff, but we do think it's important to understand the kind of mindset behind it all.
Okay, so what's the first tactic on the list?
Well, one of the big things that Yaboy Rick talks about is this idea of emotional leverage, which basically means using a woman's emotions to kind of gain control over the situation.
That sounds kind of intense.
Yeah.
How does he suggest men actually do that?
He says you need to figure out what a woman's emotional triggers are. Like, what are her insecurities? What does she need validation for? What gets her excited or makes her feel anxious? And then he says you can use that knowledge to create these like emotional highs and lows, mirror her emotions to gain her trust, and then introduce what he calls playful tension to keep her on her toes.
So basically, you're playing with someone's emotions to keep them off balance and wanting more. I mean, I get that relationships have their ups and downs naturally, but this sounds more like a calculated strategy than just the normal ebb and flow.
Exactly. And that's what makes it manipulative. It's not about building a genuine connection based on trust and respect. It's about using tactics to make someone feel dependent on you, almost obsessed with you.
One tactic that the playbook talks about a lot is this push-pull method. Can you explain that one for the folks at home who haven't read Rick's masterpiece?
Sure, the push-pull is basically this idea of giving someone lots of attention and affection, and then suddenly withdrawing it like you're pulling away. It creates this uncertainty, makes them work harder to get your approval again. It's like giving someone a taste of what they want and then snatching it away.
Honestly, that just sounds exhausting. Who has the energy for all these games? Wouldn't it be easier to just be upfront about how you feel and what you want?
From a healthy relationship standpoint, absolutely. But the playbook isn't really about healthy relationships. It's about control. And this push-pull thing, it can be pretty effective at creating a sense of longing and obsession, at least in the short term.
It kind of reminds me of those psychology experiments with rats, where they train them to press a lever for food, but they only get a reward sometimes. And it makes them even more determined to keep pressing the lever. Is that kind of what's happening here?
You're totally right. It's called intermittent reinforcement, and it's a really powerful psychological principle. It's the same idea behind slot machines. The unpredictable rewards keep people hooked.
So the playbook is basically saying men should treat women like lab rats in some giant emotional experiment.
I mean, that might be a slight exaggeration, but I see what you're saying. The book definitely reduces relationships to a set of strategies and tactics, and it totally misses the point of genuine connection and intimacy.
And speaking of intimacy, that's another area where the playbook gets pretty controversial. Rick actually talks about using sex as like a tool for control.
Yeah, this is where things start to get really problematic. The book basically says that men should dominate in the bedroom, using tactics like teasing, controlling the pace, withholding praise, even being emotionally unavailable after sex.
It's like he's taking all the joy and intimacy out of it and turning it into some kind of power struggle.
Yeah.
It's honestly pretty disturbing.
It is healthy intimacy should be about mutual pleasure, connection, vulnerability. It's about sharing something special with someone you trust. The playbook twists all of that into something that's manipulative and self-serving.
Okay, listener, I know this is getting a little heavy, but stick with us here. We're exploring this book because we think it's important to understand these perspectives, even if we completely disagree with them. So let's move on to another tactic that Rick emphasizes. Avoiding the finesse trap. What exactly does that mean?
Okay, so the finesse trap. This is basically Rick's term for women who are trying to use men for their money or resources. He is incredibly cynical about women's motivations. He basically paints them all as gold diggers or broke girls or opportunists.
So he's encouraging men to be suspicious of any woman who shows interest in their lifestyle or their financial status.
Exactly. He warns against women who drop hints about expensive things they want, or women who try to impress you by flaunting their own lifestyle, or women who share sob stories to try to get you to feel sorry for them and be generous. He even has this term, the transactional tease, which is when a woman uses flirtation or intimacy to get what she wants.
It's like he's creating this atmosphere of paranoia and distrust, like it's impossible for a woman to be genuinely interested in a man for who he is, not for what he has.
And while it's definitely smart to be aware of red flags in any relationship, this approach is super damaging. It undermines the possibility of any real connection. And it promotes this idea that relationships are just transactions, like everyone has an ulterior motive.
It's like he's turning dating into this game of chess, where you're always trying to outsmart the other person instead of building a partnership based on trust and mutual respect. But honestly, who wants to live like that? Constantly on guard, suspicious of everyone's motives. Playing these mind games all the time, it just sounds exhausting.
You're telling me it's definitely not a recipe for a healthy and happy relationship.
Okay, so before we wrap up this section, let's check in with you, listener. What are your thoughts so far? Are you surprised by any of this? Does any of it ring true to you based on your own experiences, even if you disagree with the tactics themselves?
Hold on to those thoughts because we're going to keep digging into the playbook. In the next part, we'll be looking at Rick's concept of the long game, and we'll talk about what a truly healthy and fulfilling relationship might actually look like.
Okay, so we're in the home stretch now, the final part of our deep dive into the playbook. And man, it's been a wild ride, hasn't it?
It really has. The playbook definitely takes us down some interesting paths.
Yeah, so in this last section, the long game, as Rick calls it, this is where he lays out his grand plan for how to stay in control of a relationship over time.
Right, like how to make it last, but on your terms, always having the upper hand.
And honestly, some of what he says here isn't totally crazy. Like he talks about the importance of consistency,
Yeah.
but not being predictable, maintaining emotional balance, evolving as a man, setting clear boundaries. Those actually sound like pretty solid relationship principles, don't they?
You're absolutely right. Those are all important elements of any healthy relationship. The problem, as always, is the way he frames them.
Yeah, it's like he takes these positive concepts and twists them into tools for manipulation.
Exactly. Like instead of encouraging genuine personal growth, he presents it as a way to keep a woman off balance and dependent on you.
So how does he take something like personal growth and turn it into a manipulation tactic?
We'll take reinvention, for example. He talks about constantly evolving and changing, keeping her guessing, never letting her feel like she's fully figured you out.
Right. He goes into all this stuff about physical reinvention, emotional reinvention,
Yeah.
even social reinvention. It's all,
Yeah.
he's saying you have to be a different person every day to keep a woman interested. Listener, what do you think about that? Is it even possible to keep up that level of strategic self-presentation?
I mean, it's an interesting question because reinvention in itself isn't necessarily bad. Personal growth is important for everyone, whether you're in a relationship or not. But the way the playbook talks about it, it's all about control.
Right. It's not about actually wanting to improve yourself as a person.
It's about using self-improvement as a way to keep a woman on her toes.
So basically, don't be a chameleon. Don't try to constantly change who you are to fit what you think someone else wants. It's about growing and evolving authentically. And if that attracts the right people into your life, great. And if not, well, that's okay too.
Exactly. Authenticity is way more attractive than any kind of manipulative tactic. In the long run, trying to be someone you're not is just going to lead to problems.
Okay, so to sum it all up, the playbook is basically saying Men should constantly be playing this game,
This emotional cat and mouse game.
using all these strategies to keep a woman off balance and wanting more.
But that's just not a healthy foundation for any kind of lasting relationship.
No, it's not real connection, real intimacy. It comes from a place of mutual trust and respect.
It's about being vulnerable, being your true self, and allowing your partner to do the same.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here today. We've gone through those 5 female archetypes.
We've talked about some pretty intense manipulation tactics.
And we've even touched on this idea of using reinvention as a way to control the relationship.
It's safe to say that the playbook offers a very specific and in a lot of ways problematic view of relationships.
Yeah, it definitely does. But we do think it's important to understand these viewpoints, even if we don't agree with them, because they do exist out there in the world.
And it's good to be aware of the different ways people approach relationships. But remember, healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, open communication, and shared values.
So listener, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought. If the playbook represents one extreme end of the spectrum, what does the opposite end look like for you?
Imagine a relationship where you don't need to play games or manipulate each other's emotions. A relationship built on trust, vulnerability, and a real desire to connect on a deep level. A relationship where you can be your authentic self and you feel supported and celebrated, where you can grow together as individuals.
That's the kind of relationship that's worth striving for.
So that's it for our deep dive into the playbook. We know this was a bit of an unusual request, and we appreciate you trusting us to navigate this complicated and honestly kind of crazy topic. Listener, remember, you have the power to choose what kind of relationships you want in your life. Don't let anyone tell you there's only one way to do things. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay true to yourself.